Okay, on this episode, and we're going to cover something that's a little controversial. I get it. FM3 Tech 90 Tech 1 offense and defense has been replaced by FM3 Tech 90. It's got some updated frameworks. It's been changed and revised. I get it. However, this is an educational series, and I think that this still offers a variety of good things to help you learn to develop your thinking and your basis of understanding for where these tactics and frameworks come from. So we're still going to cover it. And just like always, the podcast you're about to listen to is created by NotebookLM, but you've got a variety of other sources to go along with it today. So you've got the traditional Word document available, and you've got two separate infographics as well as a slide deck. And those are all great resources. You find the links below, but also you're going to find a complete link to the entire NotebookLM. The whole thing is shareable. So from, Army, the first one, ADP 1, all the way through the end, anything that I've done a series on, you should be able to find it in there also. All right. Simplify and enjoy. Keep those snacks handy. I'll see y'all next time.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You've asked us to revisit a foundational document, U.S. Army Field Manual 391. But we're not here today for, a remedial reading session.
Not at all.
Think of this more like a professional military education seminar. We're going to strip away the basic definitions and really plunge into the philosophy, the calculated risks, and, frankly, the sheer operational complexities that define a successful offense.
And that's the critical distinction, isn't it? For those of you already familiar with the material, we all see the FM as this authoritative blueprint for combined arms.
Right.
But it's fundamentally descriptive. It describes the art and the science of maneuver, but it is not prescriptive. Success, at the end of the day, really depends on the commander's ability to apply judgment, especially when those decision points meet friction and uncertainty.
And our focus today on that ultimate offensive imperative, seizing and retaining the initiative. The doctrine, which is, rooted in ADRP 3.0, states that the offensive task is all about defeating and destroying the enemy, seizing objectives.
Which is a fundamentally different mindset from the defense.
Totally different. Defense is often about gaining time or economizing forces. The offense is about forcing the issue every single time.
And FM 391 gives us the four big tools for that: movement to contact, attack, exploitation, and pursuit.
Exactly. So today we're charting that escalation sequence. This is the engine that converts that initial, maybe messy tactical contact into a real operational decision. We're going to focus intensely on the sequence. The attack itself, the exploitation that turns a crack in the line into a total break, and then that high-risk, high-reward phase of pursuit, which really it aims for annihilation. Our mission today is to examine how force organization and those critical control measures support that transformation from just meeting the enemy to, destroying them entirely.
Let's do it.
So let's start with the foundational philosophy, the four characteristics of the offense: surprise, concentration, tempo, and audacity. I mean, these aren't just abstract concepts on a slide.
No, they're the levers. They're the levers commanders pull to generate combat power and, most importantly, maintain the initiative.
Let's unpack surprise first. The FM defines it pretty clearly as attacking in an unexpected direction, time, type, or strength.
And you have to think about what that does. It's immediate psychological and functional warfare. Doctrinally, it delays the enemy's effective reactions, it confuses their command and control, and it induces very real psychological shock.
You're forcing them onto the back foot.
Immediately. They're forced into a reactive posture, which buys us precious time. We often talk about, the classic examples: achieving surprise by attacking in terrible weather or over terrain that seems impassable, or just through really rigorous OPSE.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here for a minute.
Please.
In today's environment, which is just saturated with ISR, we're talking ubiquitous drones, satellite imagery, global comms, is true tactical surprise still achievable? Or is it now just about maximizing that time difference between our action and the enemy's effective reaction?
That's a fantastic PME question. And look, true strategic surprise might be a unicorn at this point, very rare. But tactical surprise, I think it remains completely viable. You just have to shift your thinking. It's about changing the type or the strength of the blow.
So not just being unseen.
Exactly. The enemy might anticipate a penetration, a frontal assault. But if we execute an envelopment with completely unexpected speed, Well, that's tactical surprise. If our entire electronic warfare profile is masked until the last possible second, that maintains surprise regarding our capabilities. The goal is still to freeze their C2, just long enough for us to execute that decisive maneuver.
That freezing effect, that paralysis, it leads us directly to the next characteristic, concentration. The doctor is really emphatic that this isn't just about massing bodies and tanks in one spot.
No, that's an old way of thinking. It's about achieving synchronized effects.
Unpack that. What does that mean in practice?
It's the coordinated application of all the warfighting functions. Your fires, your electronic warfare, your maneuver, your intelligence, all at the decisive point, at the decisive time. And the FM highlights a really key operational challenge here.
Okay.
When you're crossing a linear obstacle, say a river, or passing through a choke point, a mountain pass, independent movement by your subordinate units once they get through can actually detract from the force's overall ability to concentrate.
So the late elements push too far, too fast, and outrun their support.
Precisely. Commanders have to impose almost rigid control at these critical points to ensure that the maximum quantum of combat power hits the objective simultaneously. If your armor moves too far ahead of your supporting artillery effects or your EW bubble, you're not concentrating effects, you're dispersing them. You're giving the enemy multiple small problems to solve instead of one overwhelming one.
Which is the perfect lead-in to tempo, the speed and rhythm of our operations relative to the enemy's. This is the very definition of operating inside their decision-making cycle, the old ODWOOP.
It is. I mean, if we are consistently deciding and acting faster than they can orient themselves and they decide on a course of action, their planning becomes obsolete before it's even executed.
Their orders are for a situation that no longer exists.
Exactly. And the FM explicitly links this to technology. It says advanced information systems and automated decision aids, they reduce engagement times, they enhance planning, and that facilitates rapid execution of maneuver and precision fires at greater ranges. When we lose tempo, we are sacrificing the initiative. It's that simple.
And that brings us to the last one, audacity. This one feels a little different. It's the characteristic that relies almost entirely on the commander's personality, on their willingness to take a calculated risk.
It's the simple plan, boldly executed. Audacity is that psychological force multiplier that when you combine it with high tempo, just overwhelms the enemy with blows they didn't think were possible.
But it's not recklessness.
Absolutely not. It's the studied, calculated decision to accept specific, controllable risks. Maybe it's committing the reserve slightly earlier than conventional wisdom suggests, but you do it to achieve an overwhelming result that paralyzes the enemy. It's knowing which rule to break and when.
Okay, so we've established the philosophy: surprise, concentration, tempo, audacity. Now let's explore the functional reality. How do the 6 warfighting functions become the means to achieve all this? Let's start with the one that ties it all together: mission command.
Mission command is the operational framework for managing tempo through what the doctrine calls disciplined initiative. And in the offense, successful delegation is absolutely paramount.
Why more so in the offense than the defense?
Because you have highly dispersed units operating at high speed. They cannot wait for detailed instructions from 2 levels up. It's just not possible. Subordinates have to not only understand the commander's intent, the overall goal, the desired end state, they must also have the authority to operate as they see fit, constrained only by that intent and, of course, their available resources.
So how does that look practically under the stress of an attack? I mean, where is that fine line between disciplined initiative and a subordinate just going rogue?
The line is defined by collective confidence and cohesive teams. And the FM is crystal clear on this, that trust is forged in tough, realistic training, where units develop their proficiency under incredible stress.
So it's about reps?
It's about reps. If a platoon leader knows their company commander trusts them to bypass an unexpected strong point to maintain the attack's overall tempo, that's disciplined initiative. If they bypass a key objective just because they didn't like the look of the terrain, well, that's indiscipline. That confidence to act autonomously only exists when the commander knows deep down that the subordinate's default action will align with the overall intent of the operation.
Let's shift to movement and maneuver. The goal here is obvious. Avoid enemy strengths. Create opportunities for fires. This is where formations come into play. But instead of just listing them, let's talk about the core operational trade-off that they all represent.
The trade-off is almost always speed versus protection and forward firepower. It's a constant balancing act.
Give us an example, the column.
Okay, the column formation. It's all about maximizing speed and control, especially in restricted terrain like a forest road or during limited visibility. But the trade-off is critical. Its firepower is mostly limited to its flanks. It is extremely vulnerable to an ambush or an attack that's perpendicular to its axis of advance.
So it's fast but fragile from the side.
Very. Now, conversely, you have the line formation,
Which is all about firepower.
maximum firepower to the front. It's ideal for crossing a wide-open area when you know contact is imminent and you need everything to bear quickly. But the trade-off is maneuverability and control. It has almost no depth, poor flank security, and it becomes incredibly difficult to manage in complex or restricted terrain. You can't really steer it well.
And things like the wedge, the V, the box, those are the compromises.
They're all attempts to balance these factors. They sacrifice some raw speed for better all-around security, or they try to maximize frontal and flank firepower while maintaining some depth for a reserve. The commander's job is to pick the formation that best facilitates, closing with the enemy while exposing the minimal vulnerable area. It's a direct application of the characteristic of concentration.
Okay, next up, intelligence. IPB, intelligence preparation of the battlefield. I want to talk about how intelligence acts as a protection multiplier, specifically in the offense.
This is a huge, often overlooked point. IPB is crucial for force survivability, even when you're the one attacking. Commanders use detailed products like line-of-sight overlays to understand precisely where the enemy can't see them.
So, finding the blind spots.
Finding the blind spots to mask your maneuver. But even more vital are the situation templates, the CTEMPs. They define the enemy's expected actions and capabilities. By knowing the enemy's artillery range fans, or the likely movement times for their reserves, the commander can sequence his own operations at times and in places where the enemy simply cannot effectively respond.
So, let's make that real. If the S2 shop forecasts that a specific enemy reserve can reach the main attack corridor within, say, 2 hours,
Then the main body must complete its breach, seize the objective, and establish a hasty defense faster than that 2-hour window. The intelligence literally drives the friendly force's timeline of vulnerability.
and that's why the recon fight never stops.
It cannot. Continuous reconnaissance and surveillance is not optional. It has to constantly confirm or deny your picture of the enemy's strength, their dispositions, and especially their intentions regarding obstacles and counterattack forces that will inevitably emerge during the fight.
Let's talk fires. This is the ultimate tool for achieving concentration, right? Coordinating all those direct and indirect assets.
Absolutely. And fire support planning is the rigorous, detailed process that makes it happen. It's not just lobbing shells. It dictates how preparatory fires, counterfire, suppression, and electronic warfare will all be coordinated.
It's the symphony.
It's the symphony, exactly. The plan has to integrate every available target acquisition asset, from a forward observer to a drone, and every attack asset to ensure that high payoff targets like enemy C2 nodes or their long-range artillery are struck at the precise moment the maneuver force need that window of vulnerability to open.
This brings us right back to that inherent doctrinal tension we talked about earlier, the surprise versus preparation paradox. How does commander make that call? A long, destructive prep fire versus a quiet surprise attack.
It is one of the hardest calls in an attack. On one hand, preparatory fires weaken defenses, trip the enemy, destroy obstacles, that's good. But a large, prolonged prep fire is like sending up a flare. It gives away the time and location of your main effort, completely sacrificing surprise.
So what does the FM advise?
It advises that commanders have to weigh the effects. It's situational. In limited visibility, or when operating in complex terrain where the enemy is dispersed, a massive area prep might be wasteful. The commander may favor surprise in that case, opting for a few precision-guided munitions against specific key targets, rather than a long, loud artillery barrage. You preserve secrecy and lethality.
And what about air and missile defense, AMD? When you're on the offense, you're often exposed and relying heavily on joint assets.
Very much so. Our organic ground forces are mostly conducting passive air defense dispersal, camouflage, using small arms against low-flying threats. The doctrine confirms we rely on the Joint Force Air Component Commander, the JFACC, for proactive air superiority.
So the ground unit's main job is just to survive.
It's to survive and enable the joint fight. Their core protection task is meticulously positioning their organic or supporting radars based on a careful risk assessment to preclude their early loss, and ensuring flawless communication with the AMD organizations to maintain situational awareness of the air threat.
Let's move to sustainment. High-tempo, dispersed operations. That just screams logistics nightmare. How does the doctrine handle the strain on lines of communication, the LOCs?
This is a critical point, especially when we start talking about exploitation and pursuit later. The high tempo magnifies every logistical requirement, especially for what the FM calls the major tonnage items. POL, fuel, and ammunition.
The stuff that runs out first.
Always. And the doctrine is firm. Sustainment units must be just as mobile, or in some cases even more mobile, than the maneuver forces they support. This is the whole rationale for having robust organic support battalions and forward support companies within our BCTs.
So if we link this back to operational reality, the strain on those LOCs is what ultimately dictates the culminating point of an attack, right?
100%. Logistics dictates the limits of audacity. You can have the boldest plan in the world, but if your tanks run out of gas, the plan is over. That planning tip in the manual about pre-packaging company and battalion-sized resupply sets is in there precisely because you cannot rely on traditional pull logistics when you're moving fast.
You have to push it forward.
You have to push supplies forward. If that supply flow is interrupted, or if the consumption rate for fuel or ammo exceeds the resupply rate, the force will culminate. It will cease offensive action, regardless of what the enemy's doing. Logistical failure is a self-imposed defeat.
Last one in this section, protection. Beyond the security and survivability we've touched on, what are two other critical elements the FM highlights for the offense?
Personnel recovery, or PR, and explosive ordnance disposal, EOD.
PR seems obvious.
It is, but the speed is what's critical. The manual stresses rapid response to isolating incidents because it reduces loss of life, prevents the enemy from coordinating a capture, and just generally mitigates environmental effects. It's a huge combat multiplier because recovering your people maintains unit morale and fighting integrity.
And EOD, which often gets confused with what the combat engineers do.
Right, and the FM clarifies that distinction. EOD neutralizes hazards from unexploded ordnance, IEDs, and booby traps that can restrict your movement. However, the core task of breaching and clearance of obstacles, especially deliberate minefields under fire, that remains primarily an engineer responsibility. EOD supports mobility by clearing those random hazards, but the engineers provide the deliberate, synchronized breach capability that you need for a major penetration.
Okay, that's a great overview of the principles. Let's transition now into the main event. The attack itself, Chapter 3 of the manual.
Yep.
The FM organizes the attacking force into three main parts: the security force, the main body, and the reserve. And it stresses that any task organization changes, integrating attachments, should be done back in the assembly area. So what is that security force doing during this crucial prep phase?
The security force is preventing two critical failures. First, premature detection of the friendly force's dispositions, and second, interference with the main body's preparations and final maneuver to the line of departure. They are the eyes, ears, and if necessary, the fists out front, ensuring the main body can get to the line of departure unmolested.
And the main body is all about the decisive operation, focusing that overwhelming combat power on the point of penetration.
That is its singular focus. The doctrine does say that if the location for the decisive operation is initially unclear, say, in a hasty attack, the commander has to arrange his forces in depth, hold strong reserves, and use long-range fires to shape the battle until that decisive point becomes clear. But ultimately, the main body exists to hit that one spot with maximum force.
Which brings us to the reserve. This is where the commander's hardest decisions are made. What is the doctrinal purpose of the reserve?
It has a threefold purpose: to exploit a success, to defeat an enemy counterattack, or to restore momentum to a stalled attack. And this is where we hit a huge doctrinal red flag.
Go on.
The reserve is not a committed force. The FM explicitly prohibits its use as a follow and support force or a follow and assume force. It has to remain agile, uncommitted, and available for unforeseen events.
Now hold on, let's dig into that. If an attack is successful, why can't the reserve be used as a follow and support force? To consolidate the objective, secure the rear, allow the main body to press on, that seems logistically and practically very useful.
Because that turns the reserve into a scheduled commitment. It destroys its inherent flexibility.
Yeah.
If you task the reserve with follow and support, and then the enemy launches a devastating, unexpected counterattack on your flank, what do you have left? The commander has no uncommitted force available to restore the situation.
So it's the commander's only real tool to influence the unexpected.
It is the only uncommitted force the commander retains to influence the unanticipated development of the operation. That's its entire reason for being.
And once it is committed, what happens then?
Its actions typically become, or at least reinforce, the new decisive operation. The commander's decision to commit the reserve is often the single most important decision of the entire fight. And once it's committed, the FM mandates that the commander must immediately and aggressively reconstitute a new reserve from other available units.
How?
Maybe by retasking a unit that just seized the secondary objective, or by pulling a security element back. The inability to rapidly reconstitute a reserve fundamentally limits, or even ends, the commander's future operational options.
Let's talk about controlling this complex operation. To synchronize the attack, the doctrine requires a set of minimum control measures. Let's group these functionally, starting with the ones that define space and time.
Okay, so the minimum spatial controls are the area's operations, the AO, the line of departure, or LD, the objective, and the limit of advance, or LOA. Temporally, it's simply the time of attack.
And for a penetration attack, that LOA is really important.
It's critical. It has to be located beyond the enemy's main defensive position. The point is to ensure the breach is fully completed and the unit can secure the far side of the objective without accidentally overextending right into the enemy's reserves.
And beyond those minimums, we get into more detailed synchronization points, phase lines, the probable line of deployment.
The PLD, the probable line of deployment, is a critical planning construct. It's a phase line where the unit is expected to transition into its final assault formation, the line or the wedge, before that final push.
And you want that just outside of enemy fire.
Ideally, just outside the range of effective enemy direct fire. It ensures everyone is set and synchronized right before they become maximally exposed. We also use assault positions and the final coordination line, the FCL, to do a final check that all supporting fires are set and comms are good just prior to that final charge.
This high density of control measures brings us back to that tension we discussed. Control versus subordinate initiative.
It's a constant tension. Every additional control measure, like adding intermediate objectives or using points of departure in a night attack, it increases synchronization and it reduces the risk of friendly units getting in each other's way. But it also creates rigidity.
It slows things down.
Slows down decision-making. It can force a subordinate leader to stick to a plan that might no longer be relevant because the enemy did something unexpected. A good commander is constantly assessing whether that added synchronization is worth the cost of constraining speed and subordinate adaptation.
So how does the doctrine handle fratricide mitigation, especially in complex attacks where you have friendly forces converging and joint fires in the air?
We rely on two major fire support coordination measures. First is the restrictive fire line, or RFL. This is a line established between two converging friendly surface forces. It strictly prohibits any fires or their effects from crossing that line without coordination.
So it keeps them from shooting each other during a link-up.
Exactly. The next higher common commander is the one who establishes it. The second one is the coordinated fire line, or CFL. This is a bit different. It allows for the expedited attack of targets beyond the line without requiring specific coordination for each fire mission, as long as those fires don't affect anything short of the line. It speeds up the targeting process for deep targets.
Let's shift gears to the intelligence philosophy that dictates the rhythm of the attack. FM 390-1 talks about two techniques, recon-push and recon-pull. When should the plan drive the reconnaissance?
That's reconnaissance-push. You use this when the commander has relatively good intelligence. Let's say you're pretty sure where the enemy's flank is, or you have a good idea where a good breach site is located. The plan is relatively firm, and you push your recon assets out to confirm or deny specific details of that known intelligence picture. It's an efficient use of assets when your uncertainty is low.
And conversely, recon-pull is for when intelligence is vague, forcing the plan to be more flexible. This sounds like you're feeling your way forward in the dark.
It is, and it's very similar philosophically to a movement to contact, but it's often applied deeper into the enemy's territory. In recon-pull, the main job of the reconnaissance force is to find weaknesses, gaps in the line, soft flanks, undefended logistics routes.
And then the main body follows.
Once a weakness is found, the commander shifts the main axis of advance to pull the main body into that path of least resistance. The recon elements keep moving deep, essentially drawing the main body along behind them on a successful route.
That distinction leads to a pretty fundamental doctrinal takeaway about what a deliberate attack actually is.
It does, and it's this. If the commander lacks good intelligence on the enemy's location, their disposition, and their overall strength, meaning he can't account for the majority of their units and systems, he cannot conduct a deliberate attack.
So you can't be deliberate if you're mostly guessing.
Exactly. High uncertainty demands flexibility. It forces the commander to use a movement to contact or a hasty attack until enough combat information is gathered to make a truly deliberate decision. Good intelligence is the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for detailed, deliberate planning.
Okay, so the plan is made, the execution begins. The sequence moves from administrative troop movement into full-on tactical maneuver. The book lays it out. Movement from LD to PLD, actions at the PLD, breaching, and then actions on the objective. Let's focus on that first step, the movement from the LD to the PLD.
This is a critical transition phase. The force has to move aggressively, but also has to use all available cover and concealment. If you expect contact right at the line of departure, the force should already be using bounding overwatch techniques
Maintain security.
to ensure maximum firepower and security are maintained throughout the entire advance. The commander is carefully selecting the combat formation here to balance speed against the threat, ensuring everyone stays synchronized until they hit that PLD.
What happens at the PLD, the probable line of deployment?
The PLD is that final synchronization point before the assault kicks off. This is where dismounting happens, if you're a mechanized force. Most importantly, all your supporting forces, your support by fire elements on the flanks, have to be in position and fully synchronized before the assault force crosses this line.
And this is where things like TRPs come in.
Yes, commanders use target reference points, TRPs, and engagement areas, EAs, to coordinate all the direct fires from these supporting positions. The goal is to create the maximum suppressive effect at the exact moment the assaulting force needs it most.
So after the assault, the unit seizes the objective. The fight's not over. Consolidation and reorganization are the immediate priorities. What are the key initial actions?
First, establish security immediately. Then, eliminate any remaining pockets of resistance. Then, position your forces for a hasty defense against the inevitable counterattack. And finally, adjust your fire plans to cover the new threat avenues. This all has to happen incredibly fast because the enemy will be looking for a chance to strike back while you're disorganized.
And the doctrine has some important guidance about where you set up that hasty defense.
It does. It says attacking units must avoid occupying vacated enemy positions.
Why is that? Seems like a ready-made foxhole.
Because the enemy is intimately familiar with them. They've almost certainly pre-plotted those positions for their own artillery and mortars. It's a death trap. Instead, the attacking unit should move to the next defensible piece of terrain beyond the objective and orient on new, different avenues of approach.
And finally, reorganization. It's more than just a head count.
Oh, it's a comprehensive restoration of combat capability.
Yeah.
We're talking about cross-leveling fuel and ammunition, which often means forming composite units out of what's left of several depleted ones. It means replacing key leaders who have become casualties, making sure every operational weapon system have a crew, and prioritizing the recovery and evacuation of casualties and damaged equipment. If a unit doesn't do this rapidly and thoroughly, it cannot continue the fight. It is culminated.
The FM also outlines several special-purpose attacks. These are specific doctrinal tools, right? Selected based on METTC for effects other than just seizing ground. Let's analyze the intent of a few of these, starting with the ambush.
The intent of an ambush is crystal clear. Destruction, denial, or simply stopping the enemy. Crucially, as you said, ground doesn't have to be seized and held. It's an attack by fire from concealed positions. Success hinges entirely on surprise, coordination of fires, and meticulous control. It's a tool of attrition and disruption.
Now, the counterattack. This is a tool we use when we are largely on the defensive.
Right. Its objective is to regain lost ground, cut off an exposed enemy force that's penetrated your lines, or restore your initial defensive position. And the doctrine stresses that a smart commander retains a reserve specifically to launch this counterattack after the attacking enemy has revealed their main effort and committed the bulk of their forces. It's about seizing the initiative back from the attacker.
A raid is very different because of its planned withdrawal.
A raid is a brief, sudden, high-intensity operation. You go in to seize information, destroy a high-value asset, or capture personnel, and then you conduct a planned withdrawal. It demands precise, time-sensitive intelligence and a force that's tailored for infiltration and rapid exfiltration. The objective is never retention. It's about a specific effect, then getting out.
And the spoiling attack. This is another tool used from a defensive posture to disrupt the enemy's offense.
A spoiling attack aims to seriously impair a hostile attack while the enemy is still forming up or assembling in their attack positions. The objective is to disrupt their timeline and their capabilities, not to seize terrain. It requires highly mobile forces, armor, attack aviation, and the friendly force must have mobility that's equal or superior to the enemy it's targeting. You have to be able to get in, cause chaos, and get out before you get bogged down.
And let's clarify the difference between a demonstration and a feint, the two forms of military deception.
A demonstration is a show of force where no actual contact with the enemy is intended. It's purely to draw their attention, to make them think the main attack is coming from one direction while it's actually happening elsewhere. A feint, on the other hand, involves limited actual contact. You make contact to make it look real, to convince the enemy that your feint is the main attack so they commit their reserve there, while your true main effort maneuvers somewhere else entirely.
Okay, so a successful attack has to transition rapidly into exploitation to really maximize the opportunity. So how does a commander know? How do you know when the tactical conditions are ripe for that transition? What are the doctrinal indicators of a systemic collapse?
Yeah, you have to look for things beyond just a simple enemy withdrawal. The indicators point to a systemic failure, a loss of control on their part. These include things like the disintegration of enemy formations that are larger than a battalion.
So not just one unit breaking, but a whole sector.
Exactly. Or you're overrunning key enemy command and control nodes and their support elements. You start capturing large numbers of prisoners. You see significant amounts of abandoned equipment, and there's just a clear, widespread collapse of resistance across multiple sectors. When you see those things, it means the enemy is disorganized in depth, and that's your window.
The goal then shifts from seizing a specific piece of dirt to disorganization in depth.
That's the key. Exploitation follows a successful attack, and its specific goal is to prevent the enemy from reorganizing an effective, coherent defense. You strike deep into their command structure, their logistics, their reserves, while they are at their most vulnerable.
So the attacking force initially conducts this exploitation, but the organization has to adapt quickly using fragords. What defines the composition of a dedicated exploiting force?
It has to be a reasonably self-sufficient combined armed force, and it has to possess superior mobility. It must be strong enough to defend itself and capable of independent action, often maneuvering on a very wide front with at least 2 axes of advance.
And this leads directly to the core risk that's cited in the doctrine.
It's a simple risk, but it's profound. The exploiting force must be capable of operating beyond the supporting range of the main body. This demands total self-sufficiency. They need their own logistics, their own fire support, their own intelligence collection, because they are operating far ahead of the friendly support umbrella.
Let's talk about that tension again. Speed versus security. To maintain tempo, exploiting forces have to bypass resistance. What does overextension look like in practice, and where is the real danger?
Overextension happens when a commander fails to stick to their bypass criteria. You absolutely have to overrun weak formations and go around strong pockets of resistance to maintain speed. But the danger isn't the shattered frontline units you just defeated. The real danger is the unengaged enemy reserves or follow-on forces that are still intact, deeper in the enemy's rear.
The ones you haven't found yet?
The ones you haven't found yet. Intelligence has to maintain constant tracking of these intact units, because they are the only ones capable of mounting a coherent defense or a counterattack against your very extended, very vulnerable exploitation force. If your exploiting force runs headlong into a fresh enemy division, they risk tactical defeat because their supply lines are stretched to the breaking point.
Which can then lead to the final phase, pursuit. Exploitation disorganizes. Pursuit annihilates. How does the doctrine strictly delineate the difference between these two sequential tasks?
Exploitation, as we said, is focused on seizing key terrain and disorganizing the enemy structure in depth. Pursuit is singular in its focus. It aims for the complete destruction of a fleeing hostile force. It's about destroying their ability and their will to resist. And the FA notes that you rarely achieve this by just pushing the enemy back frontally. It requires maneuver to cut off their escape.
And the transition to pursuit can only happen when resistance has fully broken down.
That's right. Pursuit requires that the enemy is already fleeing the battlefield. Any successful offensive task can transition into a pursuit if enemy resistance completely collapses, and that opportunity for total annihilation presents itself.
The pursuit is defined by its combined effort, a coordinated hammer and anvil. We need a direct pressure force and an encircling force. What are their respective roles?
So the direct pressure force maintains constant frontal contact. Its job is to conduct a series of hasty attacks to destroy the enemy's rear guard, to slow their withdrawal, and to maintain relentless pressure on their main body. Their mission is contact maintenance. They can bypass large enemy forces, but only if they can hand them off to a follow and support unit, and only if it doesn't jeopardize their primary mission of keeping the pressure on.
And the encircling force is the maneuver element that actually achieves the annihilation.
Yes. The encircling force maneuvers rapidly, often along parallel, hopefully unobstructed routes, to get to the enemy's rear or flank and cut off their retreat. Its job is to fix the enemy, to pin them, and force them into a position where they can be destroyed between the encircling force and the direct pressure force.
And this is a job for mobile forces.
The doctrine is explicit. Armored, air assault, and attack helicopter forces are best suited for this role because of their superior mobility.
And the doctrine stresses that the mobility of that encircling force is absolutely essential.
It says it must be equal or preferably superior to the withdrawing enemy. If the enemy can move faster than your encircling force, the pursuit will fail. It's that simple. The commander has to create that mobility differential, either through his own force composition or through counter-mobility operations that target the enemy's lines of retreat.
Now, pursuit is doctrinally recognized as being extremely high risk. The pursuing force is constantly consuming resources, stretching its LOCs. This makes the concept of the culminating point incredibly acute. How does a commander determine when the pursuit has to end?
Yeah, the pursuing force is burning fuel and ammunition at a completely unsustainable rate. Intelligence about fresh enemy reserves and any prepared defensive positions becomes absolutely vital for determining the termination point. The commander has to sense that inflection point, where his force's offensive capability, its logistics, its psychological stamina, its reserves, is just about exhausted.
Yeah.
And at that moment, they have to immediately transition to the defense or begin a retrograde.
The FM warns about a specific strategic trap here.
It does. The doctrine warns specifically of the profound danger of pursuing an enemy that is falling back onto its own prepared supply bases and fresh units, while your friendly force is rapidly approaching its own culminating point.
The tables turn.
The tactical advantage flips completely, and the pursuing force risks becoming the pursued. Therefore, the higher commander must terminate the pursuit if the pursuing force is assessed to be on the verge of culmination before that rapid psychological and physical drop-off occurs. And that requires a high-level, impartial command judgment, which is very hard to make when you feel like you're winning.
One last point on this. How does pursuit doctrine adapt when you're dealing with an unconventional, irregular enemy, given their tendency to just scatter?
Pursuit of unconventional enemies requires immediate, combined ground and air pursuit, often coordinated across multiple unit boundaries, because these forces can scatter or blend into the local population so quickly. But commanders have to constantly guard against the baited ambush.
The classic trap.
The classic trap. A small force executes an attack specifically to draw the friendly ground force into a rapid, violent pursuit, leading them straight into a larger, prepared ambush deeper in the enemy's chosen terrain. It's a constant danger.
We've outlined the detailed structures and processes of FM3-11, but the whole manual is framed as authoritative, not prescriptive. For the experienced professionals listening, how do we balance that requirement for doctrinal compliance with the absolute necessity of combat adaptability?
The doctrine is the framework. It gives us a common language, a common starting point. But tactics require judgment in their application. That is the art of command. Commanders have to realize that if the enemy has read the FM, then the enemy knows our expected formations, our expected synchronization points.
So you have to be unpredictable.
Successful forces are those that are capable of adapting their operations in the middle of combat to counter new and unexpected enemy actions. The doctrine provides the vocabulary. A good commander provides the novel sentence.
This circles us right back to mission command and that idea of disciplined initiative. The commander's trust is everything.
And that trust is built on shared experience. The subordinate has to have the authority to act when the C2 system fails, or when a fleeting opportunity suddenly appears. But that initiative has to remain within the commander's stated intent and their available resources. You find that in high-tempo operations, commanders who try to micromanage, they risk delaying critical decisions just long enough to lose the initiative entirely. The doctrine enables speed by mandating trust.
And we have to make sure that those specialized tasks, the ambush, the raid, the spoiling attack, are selected based purely on MTTC to achieve the commander's intent, not just because they sound cool.
Exactly. The commander selects the tool based on the required effect. Is it destruction, disruption, or seizure? The tactical task is just a mechanism. Selecting a spoiling attack when what you really need is a raid, just because the term sounds more aggressive, that's a failure of planning. Selecting the tool that achieves the necessary disruption to preserve your defense, that is tactical mastery.
This brings us to what might be the ultimate synthesis of offensive and defensive doctrine, the commander's ability to sense the culminating point. When do we stop attacking?
The attacking commander has to be constantly assessing when their subordinate units are reaching, or are about to reach, their respective culminating points. A commander retains far more freedom to choose where and when to transition to the defense if they sense this moment before the force is completely exhausted. It's a predictive function. It's based on intel, on sustainment data, on the force's status.
And what's the risk of delaying that transition? Of pushing the force past its culmination point, just because the momentum feels good?
The risk is devastating. Transitioning to the defense after you've culminated means your preparations will be hasty, your forces will be dispersed and overextended, and the psychological shift is brutal for soldiers who have been advancing for days.
The mindset is all wrong.
The mindset is all wrong. The exhausted force suddenly finds itself fighting a defensive battle on unfavorable terms. The psychological cost alone often makes that hasty defense untenable against a fresh enemy counterattack.
The FM actually provides indicators, applied to the enemy, that can help guide our own decision-making. Signs that show when an enemy attack might be failing, which signals our opportunity for a counteroffensive. What are those telltale signs of enemy overextension?
We look for systemic operational failures on their side. Things like their reserves being committed in a piecemeal fashion, one small unit at a time, rather than as a cohesive force. We look for their logistical support failing to keep pace with their advance, and, most tellingly, enemy commanders losing effective control of their subordinates due to that overextension or C2 degradation.
And when you see those signs,
When those indicators appear, it means the enemy is highly vulnerable. And that is the moment for us to exploit, to counterattack, or to renew our own offensive pressure.
So we have completed a pretty detailed dive into the operational anatomy of the offense, focusing on that escalation sequence: attack, exploitation, and pursuit. We've detailed for critical organizational structures, the reserve, the direct pressure and encircling forces, and the complex control measures needed to keep it all synchronized and mitigate fratricide.
And the foundation for all of it, as we've said, is superior mobility, relentless tempo, and ultimately that disciplined initiative driven by mission command.
Understanding the doctrine provides that necessary common reference point.
But the difference between success and failure often lies in the commander's judgment during those critical transitions, especially in sensing culmination and deciding how to balance protection with raw speed.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to consider. The doctrine states that adaptation in the midst of combat is essential.
It is.
So, given the lethality and fluidity of modern operations, how much risk must a commander be willing to accept in committing the reserve early, just to maintain tempo and sustain the initiative, knowing that the tactical environment might make reconstituting a new effective reserve nearly impossible before the enemy's next decisive action hits?
That decision, that is the definition of tactical leadership.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive. Thank you for joining us.